Last week, the Ohio House of Representatives passed its proposal for the state's budget for the next 2 fiscal years. That proposal includes substantial changes to how the state funds public schools and libraries. Our Chase Campbell has the details.
The Ohio House of Representatives passed their proposal for the state budget with a 60-39 vote, with all House Democrats and 5 Republicans dissenting. The bill eschews the Cupp-Patterson or Fair School Funding Plan, the system that's been used to calculate state school funding for the last 2 biennial budgets. According to Washington County Representative Kevin Ritter, who sits on the House Finance Committee, continuing with that plan isn't financially feasible.
We were looking at $1.8 billion to do that. The state simply doesn't have that money. So we had to refit and try to figure out how can we be fair to the largest number of schools.
Ritter says despite not following the Fair School Funding Plan, the new House budget increases school funding across the board.
What we did was put together a funding program that ensured every public school in the state, 611 school systems, received a bump. Maybe not as big as they had hoped, but everybody received a bump in funding.
Kyle Newton, superintendent of Warren Local Schools, says the changes to the school funding formula would make it more difficult for school districts to plan their own budgets.
A school district like Warren, we receive approximately 60% of our funding from the state. If it's not based on a formula, it's very hard to budget for what we are going to do moving forward every year based on a 2-year budget.
In addition to changing the funding formula, the House budget bill would prohibit school districts from carrying over more than 30% of reserve funds from one fiscal year to another. Newton says this is an arbitrary cap that interferes with how schools spend their own local dollars and punishes school districts that are frugal enough to have funds to carry over at the end of a fiscal year.
That right there is taking away, that is essentially imploding our current system. 100% imploding our current system, taking away local control.
The budget bill also includes changes to how the state funds public libraries. In years prior, the state has used a formula that puts 1.7% of the general revenue fund into public libraries. Ritter says this resulted in inconsistent funding.
In good years, that's wonderful. You get a windfall. But in years when the economy is slower, you get far fewer dollars.
In the House budget, that formula is done away with, and library funding is changed to a line item within the budget, with libraries receiving more funding than in the last budget. Ritter says this will provide more consistent and predictable funding for libraries.
Now they can expect steady growth in coming budgets. Again, every library in the state received a positive bump. No library is going to lose funding.
Conversely, Athens County Public Library Director Nick Tepe says changing funding to a line item creates uncertainty.
Every single budget, it could potentially be zeroed out, as opposed to what we currently have, which is guaranteed funding established in state law. So that would obviously make it very difficult for us to make any sorts of long-term plans based on funding if every 2 years that could potentially go away.
Tepe says the potential loss of state funding is particularly concerning for rural libraries, as they can't derive as much funding from local tax dollars as libraries in big cities. Additionally, Tepe says the line item funding increase in the House budget isn't very substantial if you account for inflation and rising prices.
Dollar for dollar, this is essentially the same amount of money that we've been receiving for the last 25 years. We've been basically receiving the exact same amount of money, regardless of inflation, from the state.
The House's budget proposal is now under consideration by the state Senate. Chase Campbell, WTAP News.